What's up, everybody? I'm back again, this time doing a blind preseason power ranking for the 2017 spring season of the LCS. Now, I say blind because we haven't really seen anything out of these guys, and I haven't even been listening to teams and their thoughts about what's happening in scrims yet. So I basically have pretty minimal information to go on, and this is kind of just like a preliminary what my first impression of every team is now that we know every team's roster, in the kind of current landscape. So let's get into it. Number one for me is Cloud9. They are mostly returning from last season, which is something I'm going to value pretty highly. I would even say overvalue in this ranking, where I care about the continuity. It gives me something to anchor onto. It's a known quantity in a sense, which sometimes a known quantity can be a bad thing when you're talking about a player who you already know everything about. But in this case, I'm using it kind of to say that I can, kind of count on this happening again next season. And with that in mind, I think Cloud9, with almost all their players returning, are going to carry on mostly what we saw at the end of last year. They are strong in every lane, they can play all phases of the game pretty well, and their only unknown part is their jungler contracts, which of course, Meteos was never a huge threat on the team. He wasn't like a super critical member where if Meteos had an off game, they can't win, that kind of stuff. So in that sense, it's not too big of a deal to take Meteos out and replace him. And also, contract is coming into a team with a ton of veterans and a good coach, so it's not like he's going to be counted on to do a lot. He'll have a ton of support on the team to help him get done what he needs to do. Also kind of playing off Reaper and the new 10 ban phase pick ban system, whatever you want to call it. I think that's good for them. I think Reaper will do really well with that. And overall, the meta is good for them. Forced 1v1s and 2v2s were great for Impact. It really unlocked him last year. And I kind of view this roster as like I said, a pretty known quantity with fairly high upside and low downside. It's not like this team's going to suddenly have synergy issues or anything like that. It should carry over pretty cleanly into next year, and they had a pretty good end of year last year, so I'm expecting a lot of good things out of them for 2017 spring. Number two for me is TSM, mostly for the same reasons as C9. I value their continuity and their high highs from last year, but they have a much larger downside coming with Turtle joining the team and replacing Doublelift. Obviously, it's a much worse loss than, well, hypothetically a worse loss than losing Meteos for contracts, just because of how impactful Doublelift was for that team and where Turtle will be weak in comparison. Whereas Doublelift was really strong in lane and we're stuck in this 2v2 meta, that's something that will exploit Turtle a little bit, and I think we saw some of that with Immortals last year. Of course, this also raises some question about Biofrost because he was a rookie on a team full of a lot of veteran players and infrastructure, and now he will have to kind of lead bot lane most likely, more than he had to with Doublelift at least. And that's not great. At least the meta isn't super punishing. Like, the bot lane meta isn't one with Annie, Leona blowing you up at 6 if you're not super careful. The Kalista's not running wild in the bot lane. It's a little more stable of a meta in terms of the champions involved, but they are forced to 2v2 every game, which could be a potential weakness from this team that I don't really see out of C9. So that's why I'm putting C9 a little ahead of them. Once again, I think the meta's fine for them in terms of coaching. Parth's a pretty good coach. I have a lot of faith in him, so I'm sure they'll adapt to the 10 pick ban thing fine. Number three on my list is Dignitas, and this team has the big import question mark with a lot of upside. Synergy is super, super important in League of Legends, and you can kind of see the impact that not having good synergy has on players, and I think the best person to look at in terms of that would be Impact over the course of his NA career, where when he showed up on TIP, he looked decent, pretty good. He looked awful on NRG, and then he looked pretty good on C9 again until the meta change happened. He didn't have to rely on his team as much because he was getting 1v1 lanes every game, and then he looked like a god in North America. So I think that historically, even though tops have been some of the worst imports behind, aside from maybe supports, with the change to 1v1s happening every game, they might end up being one of the best import slots because you can kind of leave them up there on their own, get them a good matchup, let them do work, and then you just need to coordinate TPs, which of course is difficult, but not as difficult as setting up mid-jungle roams and support stuff like that. I think in those regards, top is probably a little easier to just, let him go. On top of the fact that Dig does have some synergy with the jungler being able to snowball topside. Keen also a Korean player, so I think they have a lot of these kind of concerns I would normally have addressed already. The big question mark, of course, is their bot lane, but especially on LoD, are competent enough that as long as the top side of the map actually ends up being as strong as it looks on paper, I'm pretty confident that they'll be able to hang on in a lot of matchups, which is the important thing on a team like this. So solid team overall. Definitely you have to hope that some of these synergy problems work out, because like I said, a great player can look awful if they're just on a team that has no synergy. We've seen it before. And obviously the import coaches will be a huge boon to this team. You know, they have the Samsung Galaxy pedigree. Not much more needs to be said about that, and I'm sure they'll do fine. Number 4 on my list is CLG. Once again, going back to that continuity point, they're a solid overall team. They have no changes, I'm pretty sure. And even though they always have their ups and downs over the course of the season where Darshan or who he might be struggling a little bit, they always seem to bounce back to a certain level, and it's a super safe bet to put them in the top half, I think. Their biggest threat isn't anything to do with their own team, because I think Tony will be fine in the pick ban phase, but it has to do more with how good the new teams are. There's a little concern about the lack of firepower on this team, but that's what we've been saying about them for a while now, and they always seem to exceed expectations. So I'm still kind of looking at it that way, where I'm expecting them to do well, but when you look at some of the other teams, you kind of raise your eyebrows. But they've proved us wrong enough times. Maybe they'll prove me wrong again, do higher than 4. I don't know. I'm looking forward to see what happens. Coming in for me at number 5 is Team Liquid, and I think they're actually fairly comparable to the spring season 6 Liquid that we saw. Obviously, Reignover an upgrade over Dardoch. You can say that Golden Glue is a downgrade from Phoenix, and I think in terms of skill, that's absolutely true, but Golden Glue will have benefits of communicating. That was something that Phoenix struggled with, so it's not like a strict downgrade the way you might be worried about. And that team got 3rd in spring almost. They finished 4th, losing a close best of 5, and then getting demolished by Immortals. But overall, that team was pretty good, and you see Lorlo, I think, has gotten better, and hopefully Piglet can return to being a bot lane monster that he was. It's not a great meta for Piglet. The AD carries are not things he enjoys playing or is particularly good at, I don't think. But he still obviously is one of the most skilled AD carries out there. And even though we saw them at IEM, it actually didn't fill in any of these concerns for me. It left me with arguably more question marks. Like, the bot lane looked really bad out of nowhere. Golden Glue was inconsistent, which is the concern, I think. But he did carry some games really hard. And then jungle and top looked pretty solid, and I think that's something that they can build around. If Team Liquid ends up with this situation where Lorlo is a huge threat and like a top 3 top laner, which is possible, and their bot lane is a top 3 bot lane, and Reignover is controlling the jungle, then I think you have a really scary team who can end up a lot higher in the rankings. But there's a lot that's unproven on this team still, including the coaching staff, which they all are kind of involved in the scene and have been for a while, but they haven't have proven success on the LCS stage the way that we've seen out of a lot of the teams above them. So that's why I have my eye on them, but I think they have pretty good upside. Number 6 for me is Phoenix One, which, you know, speaking of spring TL, isn't this team just kind of like that one, but a little bit worse? Zig is probably a little worse than Lorlo. Anori is a little worse than Dardoch. Ryu probably better than Phoenix, but then Arrow was probably going to end up being worse than Piglet, and Matt and Adrian are close. I admit that this is a semi-pessimistic look at this team, but I've heard a lot of hype about them, so I want to try and even that hype out. They don't seem to have any obvious weaknesses, which is something that I think makes it very attractive to a lot of people to say that this team's going to be really good, but it also feels like their upside's a little limited. So I'm not exactly sure where this team goes. I can easily see them being in the top half of the league, and they're just outside of it at 6 for me. But I feel like their upside isn't as strong as some of the other newer teams, and they don't have the consistency going. And overall, they feel like they might be a little middling. Fly is a good coach, of course, so I'm excited to see him back in the LCS. He was working with Tip 2 seasons ago as well, so I think he ran over to China, and now he's back. I don't know. But he's always been relatively impressive to me, so I'm glad to see him back. Number 7 is Immortals, and oh boy, this team is just one giant question mark to me. I mean, the top side of the map looks awesome on paper, and we saw a little bit of that at IEM, where Dardoch and Flame were able to make a lot of big plays, but synergy is still important, and especially synergy over the course of a season, building on it. And we know attitude's probably a big concern for this team. Dardoch on TL recently, Pobelter had some on CLG, we've heard about Flame in the past. So you have to worry about how this team all holds together, like who's the glue guy here, who's gonna pick everyone up. And then on top of the fact that there's a big question mark on the bot side with an unproven rookie in Cody's son, and Ale, who I've heard good things about, but he's going to be kind of on his own potentially if Cody Sun requires a lot of hand holding. And the whole thing is just a big question mark. And going over to the coaching as well, there's just no like strong basis for why this team's going to do well, other than like the synergy really works top side and bot side's fine and Pobelters are rocking the mid lane, which can happen, but I'm really hesitant with it, and I'm not expecting this to work out in the best. Number 8 for me is FlyQuest. Now, everyone's excited to see these guys back in the LCS. I'm excited to see them there too. They're like legends and historical figures in the game, but I think people might be expecting a little too much out of them. Most of these guys were struggling a little bit on their way out of the LCS, and the way that they got back in isn't super convincing to me, because they had a close best of 5 versus TLA, which was influenced a little bit by that Rammus pick. And then TLA went on to lose in another close best of 5 to Echo Fox, who wasn't a strong team in particular. And obviously, someone got exploited really hard in that series. Golden Blue versus Froggen. And then they beat this FlyQuest. They beat Energy 0-3 to get in, which is not an impressive thing to me at all. So when I look at how they got here, I mean, it's not super impressive. I look at the players in their recent history in the LCS, once again, not super impressive. So the upside feels fairly low for this team to me. Maybe they can recapture the magic. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you just can't count out with High, where he's just this crazy dude. You know, that's kind of storyline that they push, but he really is an amazing shot caller. And they kind of have that, you know, ethereal magic of teamwork that CLG seems to have now as well, where they just outperform expectations. So I'm not expecting much out of FlyQuest, but I really would like to see them do well, because I think that'd be an incredible storyline. Number 9 for me is Echo Fox, and Looper is clearly an upgrade over KFO, so that's good. Gate is most likely an upgrade as well. Jungle, a bit of a sideways move, and so overall you would say that this should be an improvement. But I'm still not that excited about it, because the team's issue was always coordination, and getting stuck into the 2v2 standard lane meta is definitely good for them, because it solves a lot of the problems I think they were having with 2v1s. And I think overall it's a good change. Even though Keith is a little bit of a weak laner, I assume Looper's strength should offset most of that. But I still don't know how this team's like gonna close the game out. Did they improve at those kinds of things? Because the individual skill on this team was never super lacking, though there are definitely some deficiencies at different positions, but it always seemed like they just didn't know what they wanted to do. And maybe they can figure it out this year. I think this is one of the teams that I'm really underrating. They could end up way higher than 9th, and I think that, you know, maybe that'll happen. But for me, the synergy is the big question here. They struggled with the Korean top last season, and they didn't really improve that much anywhere other than top. So if that synergy issue is still there, I'm very concerned about the future of this team. Number 10 for me is, of course, Envy. I mean, there's really not too much to say here. They're clearly lacking in firepower compared to the rest of the league. They had some good synergy in the past, so maybe that's enough to overcome things, but I think they're definitely a bottom half team. And then the concern, of course, is that if these other teams work out, how well are they going to do? Their best chance for making it into the playoffs is the other teams don't work out, and that's really the upside of this team, is more, to me, how bad do the other teams come together versus how well do they come together, which is something that I don't like, having kind of like this initiative not on you. So overall, a pretty low chance, but still there, depending on what happens with the rest of the scene. That's my power rankings going into the first week of the LCS with no prep done. I'll hopefully be able to watch some scrims before the season starts. Maybe I'll put out another one. Maybe I'll just wait till week 1. But I clearly, like I said, overvalued synergy that I know exists already and kind of known components, and undervalued things like upside. So, you know, a lot of these newer teams that have a lot of imports that they're bringing in can likely overtake a TSM if the turtle problem becomes bigger than it is. And, you know, that's kind of how power rankings go. You never have any clue how teams are going to look before the season starts. So I'm not too worried if this list ends up totally wrong. I trust the community to understand. If you guys like this, please subscribe to my channel and watch my other videos. I mean, season starts January 20th, and until then, you're gonna need some entertainment, so it may as well be me. I'll see you guys next time.